Good evening, everybody. My name is Brendan Carty. I am the president of the Cornwall Board of Education, and welcome to tonight's Community Forum, Budget Forum for 2023. I'm joined at the dais here by our Superintendent, Terry Dade, and our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Harvey Sotland. I want to start tonight by going through a presentation. This is going to give you an overview of all of the budget facts, dive into some of the numbers, still keep it digestible, talk about some of the positions that have been, that will be funded, along with some programming notes. I want to talk about the tax impact that this budget will have. Then I want to provide some key voting information, both where to vote, who can vote, all that type of stuff. And then I'm going to open the floor for questions. So let's dive right into it. These are some of the essential numbers for this year's budget. The proposed budget would be just north of $87 million. That is the all-in operating budget. That represents a 7.1% increase over last year, at about $5.8 million. I'm going to dive into that number, those numbers more deeply in a second. The tax levy impact, the projected tax levy would be about $51.5 million, which represents a 1.2% increase over last year. Just to note, the maximum allowable increase this year is 1.76. So at 1.2, we're coming well below the tax cap. There is a $2.5 million use of fund balance that is being applied to the levy in order to lower the tax impact. That comes from the district's reserves. District's fund. I don't want to confuse the reserves, Harvey. Fund balance. Harvey corrects me on that every time. All right, so diving into that 7.11% increase. So what is driving that? There are two main factors. Number one is the increase in our baked-in costs. So these are contractually obligated salaries, transportation, utilities, et cetera. These are the things that, frankly, a school district cannot control from one year to the next. I'll dive into what those numbers really represent in a second, but those represent just the cost it takes to continue running the school district at its current programming for another year. The second factor is the expiration of the federal COVID relief money that we've received over the last 2 years. And again, I'll go into what that means in a second. So here's some of those baked-in costs that are increasing. Right down the list, salaries going up $1.3 million, and that's for all of the district's roughly 500 employees. Again, those are contractual increases that are baked in. Student transportation is going up over $1 million. This reflects the first year of a new 5-year contract. Frankly, we got pretty lucky for a few years with increased transportation costs. Districts across the county and larger region have been hit with even bigger increases over the past few years, but nobody escapes unscathed, so we are experiencing an increase in student transportation as well. We also have an increase in out-of-district special education tuition of about $600,000. This reflects another trend, just an increase in special needs students needing these types of placements. Our utility costs are going up, and this is a very familiar story to anybody who opens up their utility bill. This is due to inflationary pressures, just like the ones that everybody else is dealing with. Our vocational education costs are going up about $200,000. This reflects an increase in both student participation and the actual cost of tuition at BOCES vocational programs, and then another $100,000 for insurance increase. Again, just another rise in cost at the state level. So collectively, that's about $4.3 million. And again, that $4.3 million is part of what's called our rollover budget, meaning it would cost the district an extra $4.3 million to simply continue our current programming next school year. So again, baked in, not really much that you can do about that. But then there's the other factor in the increase in our costs, budget to budget increase. And that's the expiration of the federal COVID relief money. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with this concept, so I'm going to give a very brief overview. 2 years ago, our district received about $5 million from the federal government to hire additional staff to help our students recover from the academic and emotional impact of COVID. That staff, which included elementary school teachers, teachers' assistants, counselors, and social workers, among other, have proven essential in maintaining our high standards at every level. But now that federal money is expiring at the end of this school year. That was always the understanding. It was going to be a 2-year funding program. Now that that is happening, the district has to choose between cutting those positions or continuing to fund the ones that have made the biggest impact on kids. The district is choosing to fund them, which is, again, contributing to that budget-to-budget increase. Now you might say, what are some of those positions? Now keep in mind, some of these were funded through the federal money. Some of these are, let's say, modifications of what was funded, but they represent the new positions that would be funded with this year's budget. Those are 4 elementary school early intervention teachers, touch on those in a second, 1 full-time elementary school teacher, an elementary school counselor, elementary school special education teacher, a middle school counselor, high school special education teacher, a district-wide English as a second or native language teacher, a high school social worker, and then 20 additional seats to our UPK, Universal Pre-K program, and an assistant track and field coach. That represents about $1.4, $1.5 million. Now, why do we need these positions? Just a very quick explanation behind each group. So those early intervention teachers at the elementary school, one of the things that we found with the federal COVID relief money was that we were able to create a classroom within a classroom model that basically gives a more small group one-on-one instruction to those younger students. This has been really helpful for a number of reasons, but the one thing I would want to point out, we have experienced some increase in class sizes at the elementary level over the past few years, so that it's been really helpful in mitigating the impact of that. Similarly, that elementary school teacher would allow us to address that as well, particularly at the grades K through 2 level, where there are 8 classes currently at about 25, 26 students. So an additional elementary school teacher, just adding 1 to that cohort would have a direct impact on those increasing class sizes starting this coming fall. There were a couple of counselors and social worker positions mixed in at all levels in that list. Rationale for that, our kids came back to school after COVID with an increased need for social emotional support. And in the 2 years since, that need has not gone away and is clearly not going away. These counselors and social workers would provide critical assistance to all kids, but especially those with the most acute needs. And another trend that we're seeing throughout our district and really regionally is an increase in students requiring special education services. So that's why you saw those special education teacher positions included in the budget. This would allow us to address those needs specifically at the elementary and high school levels where the need is most critical. And then those 20 universal pre-K seats, this would allow us to satisfy all of our current demand so that we could basically clear the waiting list. Okay, so that's what the budget-to-budget increase is. That's why we're including some of those the positions that we are including. So let's move and talk a little bit about the funding aspect of it. Like, how can we cover our increased costs and fund those positions at the same time, right? Because we've got this 7.11% budget-to-budget increase, but we saw like the tax levy was only a modest 1.2%. So how is that working? Well, the answer is with a big bump in state aid, which I'll explain in a second, plus that modest tax increase that I mentioned. Those 2 elements bring us to where we need to go. So first, that big bump in state aid. So the district is receiving a significant bump this year. It's about a little over $6 million from the state, more than we got last year. That roughly $6 million increase, along with the 1.2% tax increase, are enough to cover all of those variables that I mentioned, the rise in costs, inflationary pressures, all that contractually obligated increases, while funding those positions that made a big impact after COVID. But keep in mind, this is not a one-time increase in state aid that will disappear next year. I know you hear that and you say, well, how can we rely on this big bump in state aid? And what if we don't get it next year? The fact is, it's not like a one-time grant. This $6 million is now part of what's called our foundation aid, meaning it will form the foundation of our aid moving forward. So each year, you get your foundation aid formula. It takes in a whole bunch of different factors, but now this $6 million will be kind of baked into that calculation moving forward. All right, so what is the tax impact both on the town or the district as a whole and also taxpayers? So as mentioned before, the school budget would increase the tax levy by 1.2%. Just a couple of things about that number. That is below the maximum allowable tax increase, or the tax cap of 1.76%. It is below the average annual increase over the last 10 years here in the district. It represents the second lowest increase over that same period. And it's in line with tax levy increases that we're seeing in surrounding districts. And I'm going to show you a little more about each of those. So this is the tax increase history just here in the Cornwall Central School District. So you can see for yourself a couple of periods there where it spiked in the low 3s, low 2s, high 1s earlier, about a decade ago. Last year, we were able to implement a 0% tax increase. That was when we were passing our capital project. But with this budget, you'll see those last 2 years are actually the two lowest numbers of the last 10 years. And the average increase in that period is 1.68. You'd love to take out the 0%, but that's in there, and that lowers the number. But even with that, the average increase is 1.68. So coming in at 1.2 is below the average increase of here in this district. And then you want to look around to surrounding districts, see what everybody else is doing. And we're right in the middle of the pack. I mean, this is a fair cross-section of Orange County, but you have some, Monroe-Woodbury is putting ahead a 0% tax increase, but then over to Minnesink, and they're doing 3.74, with everybody kind of filling in the gaps in between. So at 1.2%, we're pretty much right in the heart of it. So what does that 1.2% mean for taxpayers? If you have a $250,000 house, that's $59 a year, $5 a month. $350,000, it's $83 a year, $7 a month. $450,000 house, $106 a year, and $9 a month. So the takeaway, I know we throw all these numbers at you, and it's like, well, what does this all mean, and what is the logic behind it? Takeaway is very simple in my view. Last year, we had the capital project, and that focus was about our facilities, which were in dire need of repair. This year's budget is about our kids. They've been through a lot with COVID, and this budget makes critical investments at a time when they really need it. Many of the programs that were designed to help our students post-COVID, again, we had a choice. We could either say we made great progress with those, but funding is going away, so the positions go away, or we could endeavor to find ways to keep those programs and build on that success. This is the path that we have decided to take. And because of the increase in state aid, we've been able to do that while still staying significantly below the tax cap, which again, compared to surrounding regions and even historically here in Cornwall, compares favorably. All right, so some of the essential voting information. So the vote is Tuesday, May 16th, which is 5 days from now, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So before work, after work, skip work, whatever. It's pretty much any time throughout the day. And that's in the Cornwall Central Middle School Gymnasium, same place that it's been almost every year over the last decade, except I think one. And I think everyone knows where that is, but 122 Main Street, just a stone's throw from this room, depending on how strong your arm is. Who can vote? Usually this slide is like, yeah, I know who can vote, but I want to clarify some things because I think some people might not know that they can vote. So anyone who lives in the Cornwall Central School District can vote. So that's if you live in the town of Cornwall, live in Cornwall and Hudson, but it includes the parts of New Windsor, Highland Falls, Woodbury, anywhere that you're within the Cornwall Central School District, you can vote. So if you send your kids to school in the Cornwall Central School District, you're obviously a member of the district, you can vote. This came to my attention because I didn't realize that, you see signs around for town votes, village votes. I think a lot of people who might live in New Windsor, for instance, have just tuned that kind of stuff out and say, oh, those are Cornwall elections and they don't really affect me. But this is one that includes anybody who lives in the district itself. And of course, you still have to be 18 or above and be a registered voter, but if you satisfy those 3 requirements, you can in fact vote. Okay, before I open up the floor for questions, I want to address some common questions that I've gotten this year and some form of the questions that I seem to get all the time. So right off the bat, like what would happen if the budget gets voted down? So the board would be forced to cut over $600,000 from the proposed budget that I just kind of walked you through. So that would roughly equal 6 positions. So some combination of elementary teaching positions, counselors, or maybe instead of a position, those UPK seats would have to be cut. We don't know, it's too early to tell what those would be. We certainly haven't had any discussions on that, but when you're trying to cut $600,000, that's about 6 positions is what you're looking at. And the reason for that is we would have to lower the budget back down to a 0% tax increase, and that $600,000 is what would be required to do that. Second question, kind of alluded to it already, but why are we getting a big increase in state aid this year? So I mentioned it's part of our foundation aid. So in 2021, so only 2 years ago, New York State school districts actually won a lawsuit against the state requiring them to make up for a funding shortfall from over 10 years ago. This year, we're receiving the final portion of those backfilled funds. This is something I never thought would happen. Some veteran board members would wring their hands and say the state still owes us money from 10 years ago, and it was, that's clearly not going to happen. But sure enough, the state lost the lawsuit and had to backfill that funding shortfall. So this is the second payment we get from that period, which is why, again, it's baked into that foundation aid moving forward. And how did the district choose which positions to fund? You see that list of positions and you think like, well, what was the logic there? So this was a year-long collaborative effort, which happens every year between teachers, principals, and administrators to identify where the needs are, what positions would be the best at filling them, et cetera. And then the board comes in and makes the final selection. All right, so that's my spiel. Open it up for questions. Keep some of this voting information up there. But if you have a question, just raise your hand. Margaret Quinn will come around with the microphone.
Brandon, just 2 quick questions, more like clarification, if you can offer. One is the tax increase cap is at 1.74. We saw when you ran it in the last 10 years, there were 3%, 2%. So that cap does change year to year. That's one. And question 2 is when you said everybody can vote, you have to be a U.S. citizen, I believe.
Yes. Yes, you do have to be a U.S. citizen. So that was be 18. When I said registered to vote, I thought that covered it. But yes, you do have to be a U.S. citizen as well. But Harvey, can you? I know you would know of the 3 of us the specifics behind the fluctuating tax cap and how that's calculated.
Sure. It's not as simple as one might think. There's many variables that play into how we calculate the maximum, what we call the maximum tax cap. Each year it's going to vary based on the different parameters that we are faced with. So this year it just happened to be 1.76. In the past years, we've had it as high as over 4%. It just varies from year to year.
What's the current fund balance currently, and how much typically does it get replenished year to year?
Okay, I can address that. So let me say that right now, let's talk about fund balance and reserves to just kind of be all-encompassing. All-encompassing fund balance and reserves are about 16 million, but I need to qualify that. Of that 16 million, there's a portion that is already designated for the capital project that we have going on. That's about $5 million, okay? Additionally, part of that 16 million encompasses $4 million, actually 4.1 million, that has been assigned to this year's current budget as part of its funding. So you have the 5 and the 4, that's 9, boom, we're already down to 7 million. Okay, so to answer your question, it's about $7 million after this is all said and done. Now, to the other part of your question about what do we usually generate at the end of each year, historically speaking, our surplus is anywhere from, I would say, average between $2 and just under $3 million. Why do we have what might seem like a very large surplus? Keep in mind, the last thing we want in this world is to have a deficit. Okay, when we budget, we have to budget as if, and people hear me say this all the time, we budget as if there's a black cloud over the district every single day, because it's like the 100-year flood. It's going to happen at some point, okay, and we need to be prepared for it. But with that said, even though we have that surplus of $2 to say almost $3 million, as you can see here, we always give back that assigned fund balance that you saw of this year that Brendan spoke about of 2.5 is coming back, okay? So it's almost like a revolving type of a situation.
The collaborative process that you talk about, formulating what needs are in the school and such, how is that documented? How is that kind of drawn out so teachers, administrators, they know how to correctly express their needs, be heard, and have that be heard at the board level to provide the most opportunity for the students?
So early on, there's a conversation from principals. I'll use the high school as an example. There's department chairs at the high school who represent every content area. The principal meets with every department chair to say, what are your needs for math, science, foreign languages, things of that nature. He or she develops that list, goes through them to figure out if there's duplications, X, Y, or Z, and that is brought to district administration to further explain, prioritize, and things of that nature. So we get that from every school. Same thing with facilities, same thing with special education. Every department goes through the same process. So everything should be fed through the principal to express the current needs, and then it comes up to central administration before we bring our list to the Board of Education.
Okay, so my question then becomes, I think that process may be flawed because you then have the principal filtering all the information up. Whereas if you had central, the board, maybe have discussions with some of the teachers to go and have what's going on and what do you see, to go and make sure we are really addressing everything, especially when we have a little room for the tax cap. I think next year that should be something you re-examine.
Yeah, fair point. And just my additional feedback would be, if we limit those conversations just around budget time period, then the whole process is flawed. So this is a full year that everyone has our emails and Board of Education meetings, so we would expect a lot of different opportunities to express concerns that we might be seeing throughout the year.
I just want to add, kind of piggyback what Terry just said. It is a year-long process. Central administration is not locked up in some ivory tower. We're in the buildings, we're in meetings all the time. We're talking to the teachers, to every staff member with respect to their needs and their job. So it's not just once a year we say, okay, what do you need? We almost kind of know in advance.
Hi, I read in the Cornwall Local that the vote was 7, it wasn't unanimous, but it sounds like to me this is a grand ball budget, but there was one person who didn't vote. If you could, can you tell me the other reason why it wasn't unanimous, or what was the fair objection?
So I'll speak to that. I mean, I don't want to presume to speak for anybody and explain why they voted a certain way. I think there are always some people, register a vote based on process as opposed to substance. But again, I'm not in a position to speak for anybody else. It's not unheard of for budget votes to not be unanimous. I think the most important thing is that once a budget is adopted by the board, that the board and the district as a whole advocate for it, certainly within the bounds of what is allowed. Right, we can't go out with pom-poms and a sandwich board on Main Street, but understanding that we are satisfied with the process that it went through. We recognize that the investments that are made through the programming are needed, and that the prospect of having a budget go down is not really a one-year event that you recover from. It's a several-year event. In fact, and we had a budget go down, Harvey, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 11 years ago?
The last budget that went down was for the 2005, 2006.
Oh, it was, okay.
That was a contingent budget.
Yeah.
Yes, almost 17 years ago.
So, okay, so, and one of our veteran board members still talks about the tremors that are felt from that. He was the same one who talked about the money coming back from the state, though, so he was right there. I guess I shouldn't doubt him. But I think, to your point, though, I can't speak to individual votes, but I think the important thing is then to unify and share good information with the community so they can make a wise decision.
Thanks, Mark. John Hines, math teacher at CCHS. I'm just looking at a document on the budget website, and it appears that there's going to be an additional $2.2 million put into reserve funds, restricted reserve funds, and the appropriated fund balance looks to be $500,000 higher than, or $600,000 higher than what was presented of the 2.5. And I'm just going to ask that the board and administration consider investing some of that surplus from this year's current budget into our students. Touchscreen Chromebooks, there's many things that we can do that are one-time cost with that surplus from the school year, instead of, I'm all for fiscal conservatism, I'm all for having reserve funds, but we have needs now, and I'm just hoping that the board would consider using some of that money to directly impact our students' education instead of putting it into restricted reserve funds. Thank you.
Hi, I just have one more follow-up question. I noticed in the mail-in review, something about phase one, the classroom corridor at middle school. Was that different from the capital project reserve that was passed, or is this something additional?
That's a separate and distinct capital project. It's not what I call the district-wide big one that was voted on last year. So what we do is, within the confines of the budget, we can have a specific capital project or a couple capital projects, which are typically smaller in nature, actually part of the budget. It's part of that transfer to capital line that you might see. So that is separate and distinct. And we're doing it in two phases because, much like I just said, it's too big of a thing to throw in at this time. So we're breaking it up into 2 years. Yeah.
Anybody else? Reggie, do you have another one? You may not. You may not. Don't wait. Okay, got it. All right. Well, I thank everybody for showing up. I would say just a note to everyone here and then also at home. There's good information on our website You just have to look for the, under the Board of Education tab, I believe it's budget information. Don't quote me on that, but snoop around, you'll find it. And also, we're always sharing budget information on the Board of Education Facebook page as well. That will continue between now and next Tuesday's vote. And again, just Tuesday, May 16th, bring a friend, bring somebody you only kind of like, but just bring them. And it's Cornwall Central Middle School, be there all day. Every vote counts, so really look forward to seeing everybody out there. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.